A major study from the Cleveland Clinic, published in the journal Nature Medicine, found that people with high blood levels of one extremely common sugar substitute were nearly twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke within 3 years. And here's the unsettling part. That same sweetener may be hiding right now in the stevia or monk fruit you reach for, the one you thought was the safe choice. I know how that lands because for you, this isn't theory. It's the little packet you stir into your morning coffee. It's the spoonful you add to your yogurt at lunch. It's that jar in your cupboard with sugar-free printed on the front, the one you bought believing you were finally doing the right thing for your diabetes. And when you're living with type 2 diabetes and you're past 60, your heart and your blood vessels are already carrying more strain than most. So the question of what you sweeten your food with stops being a small detail. It becomes one of the quiet choices that adds up day after day, year after year. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through the 3 natural sweeteners that genuinely won't spike your blood sugar, and the 2 you need to look at far more carefully before you buy them again. And pay close attention to the 3rd one because it's something almost nobody picks up off the grocery shelf, yet it comes the closest to tasting like real sugar of anything I'm going to show you today. But before I go further, tell me one thing. Right now, what are you using to sweeten your coffee or your tea? Type the name of it in the comments. And if you'd like to stand alongside others past 60 who are working to stay well every single day, subscribe and join us. It only takes a click. Most people I've guided through this arrive believing honey gets a free pass. It feels natural, old-fashioned, wholesome. Surely something that comes straight from a hive can't be treated the same as plain white sugar. I understand why that belief runs so deep. For generations, honey was handed down as the wise choice, the thing your mother reached for, the sweetener that felt closer to a remedy than to candy. But your bloodstream doesn't read labels, and it doesn't care whether something is natural or processed. It only registers how fast that sweetness turns into glucose. White sugar sits at a glycemic index of around 65. Honey lands somewhere between 55 and 70, depending on the jar. In plain terms, both of them pour into your blood almost as quickly as each other. Honey isn't the safer cousin. It's the same problem wearing a prettier coat. And this is why it weighs heavier on you than on someone younger. Picture your pancreas as an engine that's been running too hot for too long. Every time sugar or honey hits your blood, that engine has to fire again, pushing out insulin to clear it away. Inside it are the very cells that make that insulin. And in someone managing type 2 diabetes, they're already stretched thin. Once or twice, that's no real burden. But 3 cups of coffee a day, every single day, becomes a foot pressing the gas pedal over and over on a motor with less and less left to give. That's the real cost, not one sweet cup, but the relentless repetition of it. Let me put a real number on this because I think it will stop you cold. 1 teaspoon of sugar in your coffee 3 times a day across a full year comes to more than 2 pounds of pure sugar, and that's from coffee alone. A single spoon of honey in your yogurt each morning adds up to more than 6 pounds of fast-absorbing sugar in a year, slipping into your blood before you've even decided what's for lunch. A teaspoon looks like nothing in the moment. Yet this is so often the hidden reason a person's A1C simply won't come down even when they're doing everything else right. Minding their plate, taking their walks, following the plan we built together. If both sugar and honey have to step away from the table, then what do you reach for instead without surrendering the sweetness you love? We'll start with the one you've almost certainly heard of, the one already waiting on nearly every grocery shelf. That sweetener is stevia, and it's the first of the 3 I want you to trust. It doesn't come out of a factory vat. It's drawn from the leaves of a small green plant, and people have been pulling sweetness from those leaves for centuries. The part that makes it so useful for you is what happens once it's inside your body, which is almost nothing at all. The compound that gives stevia its sweetness, called ribadioside A, passes straight through you without being broken down for energy. It leaves your body the way it came in. That means a glycemic index of 0 and virtually no calories. It cannot raise your blood sugar because your body never treats it as sugar in the first place. And the science backs this up, not as a hopeful guess, but as a measured result. A review of the research published in 2024 pooled together multiple studies on stevia and looked closely at its effect on blood sugar and on A1C, the number that tells us how your glucose has behaved over the past few months. Stevia held its ground as one of the soundest choices a person with diabetes can make, sitting alongside the other 2 I'll show you today in that small group of sweeteners with little to no impact on glucose. This isn't fringe, it's well studied and it holds up. So why do so many people try stevia once and never touch it again? In a word, bitterness. And here's what almost nobody has told them. That bitter aftertaste isn't really stevia's fault. It's a matter of purity. A product-rich, clean ribadioside. A tastes smooth and sweet, while a cheap, crudely extracted version carries that sharp medicinal bite that sends people running back to sugar. There's a second trap too, and it's about how much you use. Stevia is somewhere between 200 and 300 times sweeter than sugar. Let that sink in. A pinch is plenty, and a little past that pinch turns the whole cup bitter in an instant. Think of it like a single drop of food coloring in a tall glass of water. The tiniest amount changes everything, and a heavy hand ruins it. That's why stevia shines in a hot drink but struggles in baking where it can't quite behave like sugar does. I think of Nancy, 69, a retired school teacher who told me flatly that she'd given up on stevia years ago because her coffee came out tasting like medicine. When I asked how she measured it, the answer said everything. She was scooping it with the same coffee spoon she'd used for sugar for 30 years, a heaping spoonful of something hundreds of times stronger. We switched her to a high-purity riboside A product, and a genuinely small pinch, and she came back almost amused, calling the difference night and day. The lesson wasn't that stevia had failed her. It was the wrong kind in the wrong amount. If stevia still isn't quite to your taste, there's another sweetener with a far gentler flavor and almost no aftertaste at all, and it's the second one worth keeping in your kitchen. That one is monk fruit. You may also see it called luo han guo, and it carries a long story behind it. Healers in southern China were using this little green melon for close to 1,000 years, long before anyone measured a glycemic index. What they knew by tradition, we can now explain by chemistry. The sweetness in monk fruit comes from natural compounds called magrosides, and like the riboside in stevia, your body simply doesn't process them. They move through and leave without being turned into fuel. So, once again, you get sweetness with no glucose response, no insulin spike, no sugar, no calories, and no carbohydrates to count. For someone watching their blood sugar, that's about as clean as a sweetener gets. Monk fruit is intensely sweet, somewhere between 100 and 250 times sweeter than sugar. So, the same rule from a moment ago still applies. You need only a whisper of it. Where it tends to win people over is the taste. Many who could never make peace with the bitter edge of stevia find monk fruit far easier to live with, smoother and rounder, especially in coffee, in tea, in a morning smoothie. If stevia and monk fruit were the only two choices, plenty of my patients would land here simply because it goes down without a fight. But I want to plant a small flag right here, because there's something about the monk fruit sitting on your grocery shelf that matters more than you'd think. And I'm going to come back to it near the end of this video. What's printed in big letters on the front of that package is not always what's actually doing the sweetening inside it. Hold that thought because it changes how you shop. For now, just know that monk fruit earns its place as the second of the three I trust. So before I hand you the third, the one hardly anyone has ever tried, let me ask you something. What's sitting in your kitchen cupboard at this very moment? Is it stevia, monk fruit, or some other sugar-free product you picked up somewhere along the way? Type it down in the comments. I'd love to know what you're actually working with. The third sweetener is allulose, and I'd wager most of you have never once reached for it. That's a shame, because in some ways it's the most remarkable of the three. Allulose is what scientists call a rare sugar. It occurs in nature in small amounts in figs, in raisins, in maple syrup. And yet your body handles it in a completely different way from regular sugar. Here's the part that surprises people most. It tastes like sugar. Not a clever imitation. Not close, but not quite. It carries about 70% of the sweetness of table sugar with the same clean, familiar taste, and none of the bitter edge that trips people up with stevia. For anyone who's tried every substitute and quietly missed the honest taste of sugar, allulose is often the one that finally feels right. But taste is only where it starts. What makes allulose genuinely exciting for someone with diabetes is how it behaves inside you. It carries almost no calories and has practically no effect on your blood sugar. Human studies have shown that when people eat a meal alongside allulose, their blood sugar and insulin response can actually come down. And that effect shows up most clearly in people who are pre-diabetic or already living with type 2 diabetes. One way it seems to do this is by nudging your body to release a hormone called GLP-1, which helps govern how you handle glucose. Now, I want to be careful here. Allulose is not a medication, and I'm not asking you to treat it like one. But it's worth knowing that GLP-1 is the very same pathway some of the newest diabetes drugs are built around. And here's a simple sweetener that leans in that same gentle direction. A study published in 2021 in BMJ Open Diabetes Research and Care looked at exactly this, tracking how glucose and insulin responded after a sugar load when allulose was in the mix. The findings pointed the same way, a measurable, helpful nudge rather than a spike. Allulose has also been studied for its effect on body weight, with some research suggesting it can support fat loss and a healthier body composition over time. I won't oversell that, but for many of you managing weight right alongside blood sugar, it's a welcome bonus. On the practical side, allulose has one advantage the others simply don't. It bakes beautifully. It browns and caramelizes much the way sugar does, which makes it the one I'd steer you toward for a recipe. the very job people so often hand to the wrong sweetener. I do owe you an honest word of caution. Allulose is newer to the shelf than the others, so we have less long-term data on it. And in larger amounts, it can unsettle some stomachs. Start small and let your body adjust. I'm thinking of Raymond, 72, who had tried what felt like a dozen sweeteners and been let down by everyone. He actually kept a little graveyard of half-used jars in the back of a kitchen drawer. The first morning he stirred allulose into his coffee, he said it was the first time he forgot he was even using a substitute. A few weeks on, he mentioned something he hadn't expected. He was reaching for his afternoon snacks far less often. No miracle, just the right sweetener finally meeting the right person. That's the 3 I trust. But just as important are 2 sweeteners hiding in nearly every product stamped sugar-free. And I want you to start seeing them with very different eyes. The first of the 2 is erythritol, and for years it was treated as something close to a perfect sugar substitute. It barely registers on your blood sugar, and on that count alone, it earned a spot in countless diabetic-friendly products. But the picture has grown more complicated. That Cleveland Clinic research I opened with, published in Nature Medicine in 2023, examined thousands of people and found that those with high levels of erythritol in their blood were close to twice as likely to suffer a major cardiac event, a heart attack or a stroke, over the next 3 years. The same team went further. They had healthy volunteers drink a beverage sweetened with erythritol and watched what happened in the bloodstream afterward, publishing that work in 2024. What they saw was that the platelets, the tiny cells that form clots, became more active and more prone to clumping. In plainer language, the blood became a little quicker to clot than it ought to be. The second is xylitol, and it sits under a similar cloud. In June of 2024, the European Heart Journal published findings that xylitol, too, appears to encourage clotting and is associated with raised cardiovascular risk. And there's one more thing about xylitol you need to know if there's a dog in your home. It is severely toxic to dogs, even in tiny amounts. Keep it stored as carefully as you would your medications. Now I have to slow down and be very fair with you, because how you hold this information matters as much as the information itself. These studies show an association, a link. They have not proven that eating these sweeteners directly causes heart attacks. There's a real complication worth understanding. Your own body actually produces small amounts of erythritol on its own, as part of normal metabolism. So, a high level in the blood might be a sign of an underlying metabolic problem, rather than simply the result of what someone ate. That distinction is genuinely important. And it's worth saying plainly that the FDA still classifies erythritol as safe. So, I'm not standing here telling you these sweeteners will harm you. I'm telling you the signal is strong enough to deserve your caution. So let me be clear about what I'm actually asking. I'm not telling you to throw these out of your house in a panic, and I'm not telling you they're poison. What I'm asking is that you use them thoughtfully with your eyes open, and that if you already live with heart disease or carry a high risk for it, you bring this up with your own doctor before making erythritol or xylitol a daily habit. For someone in your position, that one conversation is worth having. And here is what makes all of this far more urgent than it might first appear. These 2 sweeteners I've just asked you to be cautious with may be hiding inside the very stevia or monk fruit you thought was your safe, trustworthy choice. Let me show you how that actually happens, because it's the trap I see catch the most well-meaning people. You walk down the aisle, you spot a package that says stevia or monk fruit in big, reassuring letters on the front, and you drop it in your cart feeling good about the choice. But turn that package over and read the ingredient list, and you'll often find something else listed first: erythritol. Many of these products use it as a filler, a bulking agent that gives the sweetener the volume and the spoonable texture of real sugar. Since a true pinch of pure monk fruit is so tiny, it's hard to handle. Monk fruit in particular is very frequently blended with erythritol for exactly this reason. So you end up with this strange situation. The thing you believed was the #1 choice on my list turns out to be mostly the very thing I just asked you to be careful with. That is precisely why you have to flip the package over and read the back before you buy it, not after. There's a close cousin to this mistake, and it walked right out of the comments on a video like this one. Someone proudly mentioned they'd switched to monk fruit blended with Splenda. Here's the catch. Splenda is sucralose, an artificial sweetener, not a natural one. And it's exactly the kind of thing we're trying to move away from. The World Health Organization issued guidance in 2023 advising against relying on these non-sugar sweeteners for long-term weight control. For someone like you, focused on protecting your metabolic health for years to come, the natural options are simply the steadier ground to stand on. The next mistake is treating the words sugar-free as permission to eat freely. A cookie can be sweetened with the cleanest sweetener on earth and still be built on refined white flour, modified starch, and hydrogenated oil, all of which act on your blood sugar and your body in their own right. The right sweetener inside the wrong food doesn't rescue it. Read the whole nutrition label, not just the line for sugar. And the last one is the quietest of all, the one I'd call psychological compensation. You make a genuinely good swap. Clean sweetener in your coffee, real discipline, and then, without quite noticing, you let that small victory hand you permission elsewhere. A bigger dessert on the weekend? An extra snack in the afternoon? A little reward because surely you've earned it? And that quiet bargaining can erase the entire benefit of the good choice you made. I watched both of these tangled together in one person. Barbara, 65, came in pleased that she'd moved to Monk Fruit, genuinely puzzled that her A1C hadn't budged an inch. We turned her package over together and found it was mostly erythritol. And along the way, it came out that she'd been treating herself a little more generously, certain she'd already done the hard part. 2 mistakes stacked inside a single jar. So, how do you take everything we've covered and put it to work, starting with your very next trip to the store? Let me gather it into a few clear steps you can actually follow. Here's what I hope you'll carry out of this. You do not have to give up sweetness to take care of your blood sugar. You have 3 sweeteners you can genuinely trust: stevia, monk fruit, and allulose. And 2 that deserve a far more careful eye: erythritol and xylitol. But the real win was never about finding cleverer ways to keep eating sweet things all day long. It's about meeting the honest, everyday want. The morning coffee, the yogurt at lunch, in a way that stops working against everything else you're doing so faithfully to stay well. So let me leave you with a few simple steps. First, before anything goes in your cart, turn the package over and read the back. If erythritol or sucralose is leading the ingredient list, set it down and look for a purer version. Second, match the sweetener to the job. For your daily coffee or tea, reach for a high-purity stevia or monk fruit and use only a pinch. For baking, allulose is your friend. Third, a practical heads-up. Allulose is harder to find on ordinary grocery shelves than the others, so you'll likely have the most luck ordering it online or checking a health food store. Fourth, if you live with heart disease or carry a high risk for it, ask your own doctor how they feel about you using erythritol and xylitol regularly. And last, don't let the words sugar-free become "I'm quiet" permission slip to eat more elsewhere. Now I'd love to hear from you. Of these 3, which one are you going to try first, and what surprised you the most today? And if someone you love is living with diabetes and still reaching for sugar or honey, or trusting that anything labeled sugar-free must be safe, send them this video. That small share might change the way they shop tomorrow morning. I'm Dr. Sarah Jenkins. I want to see you healthy, steady, and enjoying your coffee without a shadow of worry hanging over it. Everything I've shared today is here to teach and to guide you, never to replace the doctor who knows you and your history. And please hear me on this one. Never stop or change any medication on your own without speaking to the doctor treating you first. Take gentle care of yourself, keep choosing well in these small daily moments, and if you'd like to keep learning together, stay subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.